Great to see you all. Thank you so much for coming out for our first official event in Bristol. My name is Joy Francis. I'm the Executive Director of Words for Colour Productions. Back to Yassmin. Sudanese born, Australian, yeah. Former mechanical, mechanical engineer, broadcaster, blogger, activist, enemy of the state, no, of Australian state, TEDx sensation, talk sensation, and an activist. And she's written 2 books, as I mentioned before, Yassmin's story, which came out when you were 24. And then you took it upon yourself to corrupt young people's minds by writing You Must Be Layla. You were a mechanical engineer. You worked on oil rigs. You're really into F1, Formula One, not a swear word. And what I find intriguing, and in all those situations, not only you were usually the only woman, or the first woman, definitely the first woman of colour, definitely the only person of colour, and hell, only Muslim woman, and you've navigated all that. And so and then obviously you did your TED Talk, getting people to face up to how they view the headscarf and what it means to you, 2 million views and rising. And then, doing podcasts, being really prolific on social media. Where on earth did writing a book or books come into that in terms of, because it didn't feel like that was actually necessarily on your radar?
I loved reading growing up, and I think books, especially young adult fiction, really shaped me. I didn't see examples of people who looked like me, but in like science fiction and fantasy novels, I could be any of those characters, right? And so I think I found escape and I found possibility in a lot of that fiction. But I never thought that I would write. I was brought up in a family full of engineers, right? And so like creativity in the kind of artistic sense was not something that my parents were like, oh, you want to be creative? Build a hutch for the guinea pigs, right? Like none of this painting, right? Like, and so like that was kind of the way that we expressed ourselves. But what there was storytelling. Right. And so I don't necessarily think of what I do as like writing literature, but I think of it as telling stories. Right. And I think for so many of us, we've been told stories and we've been storytellers and we've been around people that are storytellers our entire lives. Right. Any one of my aunties could, tell stories for literally hours. And so that I think is the skill that has led me to writing books. And in all the different forms of communication that I do, whether it's on social media or on broadcast television or in podcasts, it comes back to telling stories because I think that's how we communicate and share emotion.
And that's a great link, really, and segue for you to read an extract from You Must Be Layla. It is focusing on a character, obviously called Layla, the eponymous Layla, and her journey and experience through going to a private school, wanting to be adventurous and getting herself into whole heaps of trouble and surviving racial bullying, but also expressing herself through technology.
Layla was the last one in the car after Ozzy and the twins had been dropped off at ISB in the next suburb. This new school was half an hour away, out of the burbs and set amongst the hills and high-rises of the inner city. Barbara pulled over at the gate and parked in the crowded bay area out the front of the school. Yan Hariswid, she whispered, using a curse word reserved only for grandmothers. This place was out of control. It was dark when they'd last visited, so Layla hadn't seen the school in full glory, in the sunlight though. Whoa. The buildings behind the tall gate were like something out of a Harry Potter movie. Sandstone with huge glass windows. The front entry looked like the actual stairway to heaven. Layla could see a large green oval in the distance. ISB, her old school, with its demountable shipping containers and nothing over 1 story tall, looked like a children's playground compared to this place. Good luck today, Layla, Baba called from the driver's seat. Do your best. Show them how smart the Hussein family is. Try not to get into trouble. Layla chuckled as she waved at the car, then turned to the front gate and took a huge, deep breath. You got this, Layla told herself, as she adjusted her backpack and walked through the gates. Kids milled around her, chatting excitedly about their holidays. Ooh, she heard a girl screech to another. Look at your hair. Oh man, you look like you've been working out, a deeper voice said behind her, in what Layla assumed was a conversation between 2 rugby players. OMG, Sarah totally hooked up with that boy from the party. He is so fine. Layla had no idea what anyone was talking about, but she knew she'd figure it out. Walking through the throngs of students, she felt a hush falling around her as she passed groups of people. Layla's eyes darted from side to side, not wanting to draw any extra attention to herself, but it was too late. The eyes of hundreds of curious, hostile and confused kids, and some parents and teachers, followed her down the path as she walked towards the largest structure she could see. She approached what appeared to be the main reception building to ask for directions. Walking up the path, she clocked 3 girls standing in front of the glass doors and gulped. Please don't notice me, she prayed, eyes shut tight for a short moment. Allah, help a sister out.
Your family was the only Sudanese family in Brisbane when you relocated there from Sudan. How much did you mine your own personal and family experience for the book? Because like I said, because I've obviously met you before, and I just wondered, is this Yassmin when she was younger? Is it her mother?
Almost every character in this book is sort of influenced by somebody, you know, whether it's in my extended family, like a cousin I had, or the stories that my mum would tell me. Because I mean, one of the really wonderful things about fiction is that you can make things up, but one of the wonderful things about life is that there are so many characters around us, right? And you know, even the names of lots of people in the book are like names of my aunts and uncles. And my aunt's like, I'm not like that at all. I'm like, it's fine, auntie. Like, you're all right. You're all right. But I mean, like the core sort of the setting is something that's really familiar. Like I was the first girl to wear a headscarf at a fancy private school that I got a scholarship to, right? And so the foundation of that story was one that made a lot of sense, and one that, especially given it's my first fiction book, it was sort of an easy ramp into like, okay, what could this world look like?
You effortlessly weaved in common Arabic terms and phrases, and then you provided helpfully a glossary at the back. How conscious was that a process for you?
It was really important, I think, partly also because I could not imagine the experience of being, you know, a young Sudanese kid without the Arabic and without the kind of like the phrases, and I could almost hear them in my head. So there are like sounds in Arabic that you can't translate necessarily in English. So you use like numbers instead, like you use a 3 for the sound a, or like a 5 for the sound kha. And it's not an easy thing to transliterate. And so I use the numbers when I write them down. But like, I remember having a conversation with a couple of readers who were like, oh, we thought they were like spelling mistakes, right? Yeah, it was really, it was fascinating. But for me, it was really, and I had to have a conversation with my publishers about it because they were like, well, we're not sure, maybe we should change this. And I was like, well, actually that would be doing a disservice to the way that we, as Arabic speakers, write our language in English, right? And so I think there's also an importance in normalizing some of the different ways that we communicate in our literature. For me, what's been the most rewarding thing is that the young people are the ones who've responded the most positively to all those things, right? Because it's kind of written for them. And as you say, they get it. And the thing that I find really fascinating about wanting to protect young people is that we forget that, well, we may not forget, but often we think that by insulating them, it'll be fine or they won't know. But actually, quite often, they know way more than we give them credit for. And I can't remember if I said this to you, but in one of the reviews, someone said, you know, there's too many issues that Layla's dealing with, right? And it's like, mate, that's what the life of a black Muslim 13-year-old is, right? Too many issues, right? So like, you can't just be like, well, this is just going to be the book about the black issues, and this is going to be the book about the Muslim issues, and this is no, right? Like all of it, and yes, it's overwhelming, but that is the life of these kids. That is our lives. And so to do justice to it is to look at all of them at the same time and the mess that does create. But I think it would have been, I don't know if I would have been able to separate all of them because they kind of come all at once.
Writing a book at a time where Islamophobia is like the dog whistle, not the dog whistle, couched in policy and media as reason. Where do you see that fitting, and what is the position for that?
I think part of the reason that Layla is grappling with all these questions is because they're questions that I grapple with. They're questions that I've grappled with since I was 10 years old, and I wore a headscarf just after 9/11, and people were like, is it a political statement? I'm like, I'm 10. What's a political statement, right? Like, we haven't even done trigonometry. Like, calm down. So, I think it's interesting because I don't think I sought to ask these questions. I don't think I sought to create a character that reflected the politics of the day or the challenges of living in the politics of the day. But I think the inherent experience of a character like Layla, of someone like Layla, means that she must grapple with these questions. And I think that's why, really fortunately, the book has been read by 10-year-olds as well as 50-year-olds, because they are questions that we still grapple with, right? And they are themes that are for people today kind of universal.